Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with random reviews from the Overflow Room. And we're in the S's. We're moving backwards through the end of the S's. And we begin this particular episode with oh my goodness, lots of stuff here. Joseph Szigeti, or Szigeti, or however you want to pronounce it. Yeah, the Joseph Szigeti recordings. Wow. One of the great violinists of the 20th century, a thinking person's violinist. He was a Kunst violinist rather than a Stimm violinist. In other words, he wasn't known for his gorgeousness of tone. He was known for his dedication to contemporary repertoire, for his thoughtful and probing accounts of the great masterpieces. And here's like a chunk of stuff. Most of his best recordings were early. They were made in the early days of the 1920s, 30s maybe. After that, I mean, he recorded until what, the 50s and 60s or something out there, but by then his technique had deteriorated quite substantially. And we've talked about that a little bit in some of the other videos here, and you could read reviews of most of this stuff on ClassicsToday.com, which will give you a good sense of his output, especially if you read Jed Disler's stuff, because he's really on top of all the historical things. So this is the complete HMV recordings on Biddulph, which sort of no longer exists or came back recently from non-existence. Lots of little, 78 4-minute thingies, Bach and Handel and Beethoven and Mozart and Schubert and Rubinstein and Sibelius and Arnold and Hubai and Hubai and Hubai and Hubai and Hubai and Laszlo. That's what you get. Then we've got this wonderful Naxos historical Beethoven Violin Concerto and Mozart Concerto for the Beethoven was the British Symphony Orchestra under Bruno Walter. Yeah, from 1932. Some really famous recording of the Beethoven Concerto. And the Mozart is with Thomas Beecham in the London Phil from 1934. I mean, that's kind of like major. And then there's this thing. This thing is, remember, this is Andante. I talked about Andante. I made a whole video about Andante that was supposedly one of the first internet classical music extravaganzas that was actually kind of a front for the acquisition of a lovely property in the south of France. It's a good story. But they decided to do historical recordings because they took over this property in the south of France, called the Panagel Foundation. He collected billions of 78s. I stayed there a couple times. I was there because at the corner of the Panagel Foundation was a home. It was an old olive oil pressing facility. It was quite lovely. That had an apartment occupied by my friend, conductor Antonio de Almeida in Saint-Rémy-de-Provence. It was a glorious place. I mean, it was a plum piece of property, of course. And so I actually hung out at the Panagel Foundation, and they took recordings in his collection of 78s, which were endless, and they issued these things. So this is the Szigeti Andante release, 2 discs of various things, which I stick there, which is now falling apart. So much for their, astonishingly high quality standards. Pearl Records. The Bach Double Concerto with Carl Flesch, who was one of the great violin pedagogues of the early 20th century. The Bloch Violin Concerto, which I think Szigeti premiered, didn't he? It's a famous recording. This could be in our series of, they live to make recordings. It's with Charles Munch and the Paris Conservatory Orchestra. And the Nigun from Paul Shem. Very, very cool. That's sort of a classic recording, that Bloch recording. Then we've got 2 more discs on Biddulph, Bach, Handel, Tartini, and the Bach D minor violin concerto. Yeah, and the Prokofiev violin sonatas 1 and 2, Stravinsky's Pastoral Duo Concertante, and the Russian Maiden Song. So these are on formerly Biddulph, and that's Szigeti. You will have your own favorites of his, I am sure. Then we've got this Musical Heritage Society repressing of the complete George Szell Concertgebouw recordings, which for Philips, which I of course kept because I didn't know what Philips was going to do. So the fact that these were available, from Musical Heritage Society was like, whew, at least they'll exist, because you get here. What you get is Schubert's Rosamunde music, Mendelssohn Midsummer Night's Dream stuff, Mozart's 34th Symphony, an amazing Beethoven Fifth, and the reference recording, along with Szell's own Tokyo recording, the live one of Sibelius' Second. Just absolutely stunningly fabulous, amazing Sibelius Second, which everyone in their right mind should own. And then we've got the George Szell Great Conductors of the 20th Century series. Yes, Great Conductors of the 20th Century. It's got all kinds of stuff. I saved these because, Szell, we didn't know what was going to happen to Szell's legacy. You couldn't get most of it. Now, of course, the jumbo box is out there somewhere, and he's been rather well treated in the big box category. But for a while, we had no choice. So there's that thing. There's no reason to get into it more. Then we have wonderful music by Jan Pieterszoon Sweelinck, the Nederlandische composer guy who I've talked about, who did one of the most fabulous comprehensive things in the history of composition. He set the entire Book of Psalms as French language motets, a glorious series of 150-something compositions or so. And they've all been recorded on glossa, and I've talked about those before. And the Sweelinck choral music more generally, that was the majority of what he wrote, but he was also a wonderful composer of keyboard and organ music. Bach admired him tremendously. His years were 1562 to 1621. He was one of the first major composers of keyboard music, instrumental keyboard music. So here's a bunch of keyboard works on the Globe label featuring Anneke Wittenbosch, harpsichord and organ, including Mein junges Leben hat ein Ende, one of his most famous pieces. And also here, we've got 2 discs of organ music played by Christopher Herrick on Hyperion. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. And you also get Mein junges Leben hat ein Ende. It's here too. It's also a minute and a half faster than this one. So you may like that more, and some of his other things. All worth hearing. Just a composer to discover. I can't go into the details of this particular format, but, just so you know, I have, those big boxes of his stuff upstairs. So this went into the Overflow Room, but I'm saving it. Still not as frequently recorded as he might be, and not as well known as he should be. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.